For Leo, the world was a sprawling, intricate tapestry woven from 1,000 tiny, often overlooked threads. Most people saw only the major patterns, the bold colors, and the central figures, but Leo was a meticulous archivist of the threads themselves. He was 16, a boy who found solace not in the clamor of social life, but in the quiet, almost meditative act of observation. He moved through the world as a ghost, a silent, unassuming presence, whose greatest strength was his ability to see without being seen, to listen without having to speak. His existence was a quiet rhythm, a predictable, self-contained system he had perfected over a lifetime of being overlooked. And on this seemingly ordinary Saturday afternoon, that rhythm was the mundane symphony of a bustling suburban supermarket. To most, the supermarket was a place of errands, a necessary chore on a weekend. To Leo, it was a vibrant, chaotic ecosystem, a microcosm of human behavior in its most unguarded form. The air was a complex blend of smells, the sweet, almost intoxicating aroma of ripe strawberries and freshly baked bread from the bakery, a warm, comforting scent that spoke of home, the sharper, colder scent of cleaning solution, and the metallic tang of the refrigerated meats, the delicate floral perfume of a woman who had just walked by, a ghost of a fragrance that lingered in the air for a moment before dissipating. The sounds were a chorus of 1,000 small, everyday acts. The rhythmic beep of the checkout scanner, a sound that to Leo had its own unique, calming cadence. The low, consistent rumble of shopping cart wheels, a dull roar that was a constant in the background. The high-pitched shriek of a young child, a jarring, dissonant note in the melody, followed by the soft, almost imperceptible murmur of a mother's voice. The lighting, too, was a detail. Leo noted a stark fluorescent white in the main aisles, a warm golden glow in the bakery, and a cool, almost bluish hue in the produce section. Leo processed all of this information not as noise, but as data, a complex and beautiful system of cause and effect that he could decipher with a quiet, almost unsettling precision. He moved through the aisles with an almost imperceptible grace, his faded hoodie and worn-out sneakers a perfect uniform of anonymity. He was lanky and slight, with a mop of sandy brown hair that perpetually fell over one eye, and a gaze that was both sharp and deeply reflective. He wasn't popular, and he wasn't unpopular. He was simply there. A quiet presence in a loud world, a boy whose presence was so gentle, so self-contained, that he often went unnoticed. He found a kind of peace in this state, a freedom to observe the world without the exhausting requirement of having to participate in it. For Leo, silence was not an absence of sound. It was a sanctuary for thought. He would watch people not out of judgment, but out of pure, unfiltered curiosity, cataloging their mannerisms, their anxieties, their fleeting moments of joy. He noticed the subtle shift in a couple's body language as they disagreed over a brand of cereal, the way a woman's shoulders slumped with exhaustion as she reached for a heavy carton of milk. He saw a world of unspoken stories, and he was the one who could read them, a silent architect of 1,000 little truths. Today's mission, however, was not his own. It was a selfless, quiet task he performed every Saturday for his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She was a kind, frail woman who lived alone and whose health had made it difficult for her to navigate the bustling aisles of the supermarket. Her grocery list was a small handwritten note on a torn piece of notebook paper, its lines filled with meticulous, shaky script: milk, eggs, white bread, 2 apples, 1 can of chicken soup. Leo carried the list as if it were a sacred text, his movements deliberate and precise. He didn't see it as a chore. He saw it as a privilege, a small, tangible way to connect with a world that often felt distant and alien. He found a strange sense of purpose in this simple, selfless act, a feeling of being a part of a larger, more meaningful narrative that was not just about him. For Leo, this was the essence of humanity, not the grand gestures, but the small, consistent acts of kindness that went unnoticed and uncelebrated. He was in the produce section, a vibrant, colorful world of greens and reds and yellows, a sensory explosion that he processed with a quiet, efficient calm. He was meticulously inspecting a cluster of Granny Smith apples, checking for bruises and blemishes with a professional's eye, when a small, high-pitched wail cut through the low hum of the store. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated despair, a sound that to Leo was a clear signal of a system in distress. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the aisle. A young mother, her face a mask of frantic panic, was frantically searching for something, her eyes darting around the shelves with a wild, desperate energy. Her son, a small cherubic boy of about 4, was crying uncontrollably, his tiny hands clutching at her legs. Teddy the boy wailed, his voice thick with hiccuping sobs. "I want my Teddy." The mother, her face pale with worry and frustration, began to retrace her steps, her search growing more and more desperate. The other shoppers, lost in their own little worlds of shopping lists and dinner plans, barely registered the scene. A few glanced up, a flash of fleeting annoyance on their faces before returning to their errands. A teenage couple laughed, their voices a cruel, discordant note in the symphony of the store. But Leo saw it all. He saw the child's despair, a genuine, heart-wrenching loss that resonated with the forgotten parts of his own childhood. He saw the mother's panic, a very real, tangible anxiety that made her movements clumsy and inefficient. He had a natural ability to see the connections, to find the patterns in the chaos. His eyes, a powerful and restless machine, scanned the area with a terrifying speed, piecing together a narrative from a few fleeting clues. He saw the subtle path of a small boy, the last place he had been, and the logical conclusion of where a beloved toy might have ended up. His gaze settled on a towering display of cereal boxes, a colorful, chaotic mountain of cardboard and sugar. And there it was, tucked behind a box of crunchy puffs, a small, scruffy teddy bear with one missing eye and a single floppy ear. The bear was a relic, a veteran of countless childhood adventures, and it was now a lost soldier behind enemy lines. Leo didn't hesitate. He didn't make a big show of it. He didn't interrupt the mother's frantic search to announce his discovery. He simply walked over to the display, his movements a testament to his quiet purpose. He reached behind the boxes and retrieved the small, forgotten toy, his fingers moving with a gentle, practiced ease. He walked over to the mother and, without a word, handed the bear to the child. The boy's wails immediately subsided, replaced by a hiccuping sob of pure, unadulterated relief as he clutched his lost friend to his chest. The mother, her face a mix of exhaustion and profound gratitude, looked at Leo. She saw a quiet boy in a faded hoodie, a boy who had performed a small, heroic act of kindness. She saw not a hero, but a miracle. She thanked him, her voice thick with emotion. Leo simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and returned to his apples, the small act of heroism going completely unnoticed by everyone else. It was his save the cat moment, a quiet testament to his character, a moment that proved that his silence was not a sign of apathy, but a sign of a deep, abiding kindness and a powerful, unseen intellect. As he finally made his way to the checkout line, his basket filled with the simple, life-sustaining groceries for Mrs. Gable, his eyes, ever observant, settled on a woman standing 2 spots ahead of him. She was pregnant, her silhouette a gentle, rounded curve in the bustling line. She was a woman of quiet dignity, with a face that was both beautiful and somehow fragile, a kind of porcelain grace that seemed out of place in the fluorescent harshness of the supermarket. She wore a simple, unadorned dress, a soft, flowing fabric that concealed rather than accentuated her condition. Her hands were clasped over her burgeoning stomach, a protective, almost instinctual gesture. But Leo, the human camera, saw more than her outward appearance. He saw a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor in her right hand, a tiny, nervous shudder that spoke of an unseen distress. He saw a slight, unnatural pallor in her face, a pale, almost waxy complexion that was at odds with the healthy glow of a pregnant woman. He noticed the fine beads of sweat on her forehead, a detail missed by everyone else who was too busy with their own checkout line anxieties. He also saw the slight, almost imperceptible swaying of her body, a tiny wobble that spoke of a deep, inner instability. Her eyes, a beautiful shade of emerald green, were fixed on some distant, unseen point, a look of profound concentration that hinted at a woman fighting a silent internal battle. And he saw a small, delicate gold locket, a single exquisite piece of jewelry that seemed out of place with her otherwise unassuming clothes, a single expensive detail that hinted at a world of wealth and privilege that was completely hidden from view. He was the only one in the entire store to notice the subtle, silent signs of her distress, the quiet indicators of a storm that was about to break. He was a silent witness, a quiet presence in a world that was about to be turned upside down. The quiet rhythm of the supermarket, that grand, messy symphony Leo had so expertly observed, was about to be shattered. The silence was not a physical presence. It was a psychological one, a heavy, almost suffocating stillness that fell over the checkout line. The woman, Eleanor Vance, the pregnant stranger with the beautiful, fragile face, had gone completely still. Her hands, which had been clasped protectively over her stomach, fell to her sides, her fingers splaying out in a silent surrender. Her porcelain-like skin, which had been pale just moments before now, had a translucent, almost ghostly quality. Leo, the silent archivist, was the only one who saw the subtle, sickening shift in the system. To the others, she was just a woman in line, a moment of fleeting anonymity in their own busy lives. To Leo, she was a human being in distress, a system on the verge of a catastrophic failure. His heart, which had been a quiet, steady metronome, began to beat a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated fear, the kind of primal terror that makes you want to run and hide. He was not a hero. He was just a boy, a quiet observer who was more comfortable with data than with people. His entire life had been a series of carefully constructed walls, a fortress of anonymity that kept him safe from the messy, unpredictable chaos of the real world. But now, those walls were beginning to crumble. This was not a misplaced teddy bear. This was not a subtle sag in the supermarket floor. This was a human life, a silent ticking clock that was about to run out. The thought of it, the sheer terrifying responsibility of it all, made him want to retreat, to shrink back into the safety of his hoodie and disappear into the crowd. But something else, a different kind of instinct, began to rise up within him, an impulse that was stronger than his fear. He saw a flash of his neighbor, Mrs. Gable's frail, kind face. He heard the echoes of his first aid course, a tedious, forgotten lecture that was now roaring back to life in his mind with an almost terrifying clarity. He saw the woman's eyes, those beautiful emerald green eyes, roll back into her head, a silent final surrender to an unknown force. He heard a soft, sickening thud as her body, a beautiful rounded curve, just moments before collapsed onto the linoleum floor. The sound, a sharp, jarring punctuation in the mundane symphony of the supermarket, was the sound of the world breaking. And then the chaos began. The crowd, which had been oblivious just moments before now, turned into a frenzied, unhelpful mass of panic. People began to shout their voices, a cacophony of fear and speculation. A teenage girl pulled out her phone, the flash of her camera, a blinding, intrusive light in the dimness of the checkout line. A store employee began to scream for a manager, his voice a panicked, high-pitched shriek. No one was acting. No one was helping. They were just watching. Leo felt a surge of white-hot anger, a feeling that was so foreign to him that it almost took his breath away. They were just watching a crowd of silent, useless onlookers, 1,000 eyes and 1,000 screens documenting a tragedy without lifting a single finger to stop it. As he pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest, a new figure appeared. A man, a self-important, arrogant man in an expensive polo shirt, his face a mask of condescending confidence, pushed past him with a brutal, unthinking force. A stethoscope, a symbol of his self-proclaimed authority, dangled from his neck. This was Dr. Alan Thorne, a man who saw a crisis not as a call to service, but as a stage, a golden opportunity to be the hero. "I'm a doctor," he bellowed, his voice a loud, booming presence in the chaos. "Everyone step back, I've got this." He knelt down next to the woman, his movements a theatrical, performative display of competence. The store manager, a man named Mr. Davies, a plump, condescending man with a perpetually damp forehead, rushed over his face, pale with alarm. He saw Dr. Thorne, a man of wealth and authority, a man who fit the narrative of a hero. He saw Leo, a quiet, unassuming teenager in a faded hoodie, a boy who in his prejudiced mind was a troublemaker, a potential liability. He immediately sided with the doctor. "Everyone back off," he shouted, his voice a high, frantic squeal. "The doctor is in charge, you kid," he said, pointing a shaking finger at Leo. "Get out of the way before you get in trouble." The store was now a scene of utter chaos, a collision of incompetence, arrogance, and prejudice. The pregnant woman. The reason for all of this chaos lay silent and still on the cold, hard floor. Leo, a quiet teenager in a fading hoodie, was now standing at the very center of it all, a single solitary figure in a storm of human drama. The choice was clear. He could retreat, a ghost in the machine, and let the doctor, a man who seemed to be more interested in his own performance than in the life of the woman on the floor, take control. Or he could act a quiet hero, a voice of reason in a world that had lost its mind. He had to make a choice, and in that moment, in that place of profound chaos and human indifference, he knew with a sudden chilling clarity that he could no longer remain a quiet bystander. He was standing at the point of no return, a single solitary figure who was about to defy a world that had spent its entire life ignoring him. The supermarket, a place of quiet, predictable rhythms just moments ago, was now a storm of human chaos. The air, once filled with the mundane smells of groceries, was now thick with the scent of fear, confusion, and a suffocating, almost tangible tension. In the eye of this storm stood Leo, a boy who had spent his life avoiding the spotlight, now thrust into its blinding glare. He stood frozen for a split second, his mind a system built on logic and data, grappling with the sheer irrational anarchy that surrounded him. He saw the panicked faces of the crowd, the blurry lights of a dozen cell phones, the wild, desperate gestures of the store employee. He saw the pregnant woman, Eleanor Vance, a silent, motionless figure on the cold linoleum floor, her life hanging in a delicate, precarious balance. And he saw them, the self-proclaimed hero and the terrified manager, a collision of arrogance and ineptitude that was making the situation infinitely worse. The Dr. Alan Thorne was a man who performed to an audience. He was a symphony of dramatic, performative movements, his every action designed not to help, but to impress. He knelt by Eleanor, not with the gentle professional hands of a healer, but with the grand sweeping gestures of a stage magician. He was bellowing instructions to a crowd that was too panicked to listen, his voice a booming authoritative presence that only served to heighten the chaos. "Stand back. Give her air," he shouted, his eyes scanning the crowd not for a helpful face, but for a sign of admiration. He was a doctor, and in this moment, he was the hero. He had been given a stage, and he was determined to use it. Beside him, the store manager, Mr. Davies, was a study in pure, unadulterated terror. His plump, jowly face was pale, his perpetually damp forehead now slick with sweat. He saw a lawsuit, a public relations nightmare, a career-ending disaster. He was a man who lived his life by the rules, by the book, and this was an event for which there was no rule. He saw the doctor, a man of authority and expensive clothes, and he latched onto him like a drowning man to a life preserver. The doctor was the answer, the solution, the one person who could make this all go away. He saw Leo, a quiet, unassuming teenager in a faded hoodie, a boy who in his prejudiced mind was a troublemaker, a potential liability. He immediately sided with the doctor, his voice a high, frantic squeal. "Everyone back off. The doctor is in charge." "You kid," he said, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger at Leo. "Get out of the way before you get in trouble." Leo, however, was no longer a quiet bystander. The fear, that primal, gut-wrenching terror he had felt just moments before, had been replaced by a quiet, ice-cold clarity. The echoes of his first aid course, a tedious, forgotten lecture, were now roaring back to life in his mind with an almost terrifying clarity. He saw the data, the precise, unyielding facts of the situation. Eleanor Vance was not just unconscious. Her breathing was shallow. Her skin, once pale, now had a subtle, waxy sheen. Her symptoms, a precise set of variables Leo had observed just moments before, were not indicative of a simple faint. They were indicative of something far more serious. He saw the doctor, a man who was more interested in his own performance than in the life of the woman on the floor. He saw the manager, a man who was more interested in covering his own backside than in the well-being of a customer. He saw the system failing, and he knew with a sudden chilling certainty that he had to intervene. He pushed through the crowd, a ghost no longer. The other shoppers, their attention fixed on the drama, barely noticed him. He moved with a quiet, efficient purpose, his movements a testament to his calm, methodical mind. He knelt down beside Eleanor, his gaze not on the doctor, but on her. He ignored Dr. Thorne's booming instructions and Mr. Davies's panicked threats. His hands, though young, were gentle and steady. He checked her pulse, a rapid, thready beat against his fingers. He spoke to her, his voice a low, soothing murmur that was for her ears only. "You're going to be okay?" he said, a quiet promise in a world of frantic noise. "Help is coming. Just hold on." He then, with a quiet authority that belied his age, began to act. He didn't make a grand show of it. He didn't bellow instructions to the crowd. He simply began to apply the knowledge he had, a forgotten lecture that was now, in this moment, his greatest strength. He gently elevated her feet, a simple textbook action designed to increase blood flow to the brain. He turned her head slightly to the side to prevent her from choking. His actions were precise, professional, and utterly devoid of the theatricality that had so defined the doctor's performance. Dr. Thorne, a man who was not used to being upstaged, was now a study in pure, unadulterated fury. He had been given a stage, and now a quiet teenager in a faded hoodie was stealing his thunder. He stood up, his face a mask of rage, and loomed over Leo. "What do you think you're doing, kid?" he bellowed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I am a medical professional. You're a liability. You're going to get her killed. Mr. Davies." The manager saw the doctor's anger and immediately latched onto it. "Get away from her, you little troublemaker. I'm calling security. You're going to be arrested for assault." But Leo, a boy who had been trained by a lifetime of being ignored, was impervious to their threats. He had a job to do. He had a system to fix. He looked up at the doctor, his gaze calm and unwavering. "She's not just fainting," he said, his voice a quiet, ice-cold statement of fact. "Her blood sugar is dropping. She's hypoglycemic. She needs something sugary now." He pointed to the A display of candy bars at the end of the aisle. "We need a chocolate bar now. The ambulance is still minutes away." His words were not a request. They were a command. A quiet, terrifyingly clear command. The crowd, which had been a chaotic mass of panic and onlookers, was now silent. They had seen the contrast between the two men, the doctor, a booming, arrogant man who was more interested in his own performance, and Leo, a quiet, unassuming boy who was speaking with the calm, methodical authority of a true professional. The mother, the same mother whose child's teddy bear he had found just an hour ago, was standing in the crowd, a look of profound, dawning recognition on her face. She saw not a troublemaker, but a hero, a quiet, unassuming boy who was defying a world that had spent its entire life ignoring him. The doctor, however, was not about to give up his stage. "Hypoglycemic. Are you insane? What do you know about hypoglycemia? You're a child. This is a medical emergency, not a game. You're going to get us all sued." His words were a last, desperate attempt to regain control, to recapture the narrative of a hero. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted. Leo, the silent archivist, had just exposed the fatal flaw in the system. The doctor, for all his bluster and theatrics, was a fraud, and the manager, for all his bluster and threats, was a fool. Leo, a quiet teenager in a faded hoodie, had just unveiled the truth, a quiet, devastating truth that was about to change everything. The checkout aisle, once a mundane space for commerce and casual conversation, had transformed into an arena. The air, thick with the scent of fear and fluorescent-lit anxiety, hummed with a tension that was almost physical. The crowd of onlookers, a shifting, murmuring mass, was no longer a collection of individuals, but a single collective jury. Their collective gaze fixed on the spectacle unfolding on the cold linoleum floor. In the center of it all, the pregnant woman Eleanor Vance lay in silent stillness, a human prize in a battle of wills. And standing over her, locked in a silent, seething confrontation, were the two combatants, the self-proclaimed hero, and the reluctant one, the man who saw a stage, and the boy who saw a system in distress. Dr. Alan Thorne, for all his bluster and theatricality, was now a man on the ropes. His face, once a mask of condescending confidence, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. A teenage boy in a faded hoodie had just publicly and with an unsettling calm called his competence into question. His mind, a system built on decades of professional validation and unquestioning authority, was short-circuiting. The world as he knew it was not supposed to work this way. He, a man of power and prestige, was not supposed to be contradicted by a child. He was not supposed to be challenged. And he was certainly not supposed to be losing the crowd. The store manager, Mr. Davies, was a man caught in the crossfire. He saw Dr. Thorne's fury, a wild, uncontrollable rage that scared him more than the pregnant woman's collapse. He also saw the quiet, unsettling authority in the boy's eyes, a certainty that in a world of absolute chaos was a dangerous and alluring thing. But his fear of authority was greater than his sense of fairness. He had already chosen his side, and he was not about to abandon it. "He's right," he shouted, his voice a high, frantic squeal, not in agreement with Leo, but in a desperate attempt to placate the doctor. "He's a medical professional. This kid is just a troublemaker. He doesn't know what he's talking about." His words were not a statement of fact. They were a plea, a desperate, pathetic attempt to regain control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond his meager authority. Leo, however, was in a different place entirely. The world around him had ceased to exist. The shouting, the frantic gestures, the judgmental faces, it was all a blur, a distant muffled roar. He was a system, and he was focused on a single solitary goal to fix the system that was failing at his feet. His mind, a quiet, methodical machine, was running 1,000 calculations per second. He was processing the data, the shallow, irregular breaths, the clammy skin, the subtle, almost imperceptible tremor that still ran through Eleanor's body. He had called out the diagnosis hypoglycemia, and now he had to prove it. He had to act. He had to be a hero not by choice, but by necessity. He knew the ambulance was still minutes away. He knew that every second counted. He knew that the doctor, a man who was now a study in pure irrational rage, was not going to help. And he knew that the manager, a man who was now a study in pure irrational fear, was not going to help. He was alone. Utterly, completely alone. His greatest strength, his anonymity, was now gone. He was standing in the blinding glare of the spotlight with a human life hanging in the balance, and there was no one to help him. This was the ultimate test. The arena had been built. The challenge had been issued. And Leo, a quiet, unassuming teenager in a faded hoodie, was now standing on his own, with the fate of a complete stranger and her unborn child resting squarely on his shoulders. He looked up at the doctor, his gaze calm and unwavering, his voice a quiet, ice-cold statement of fact. She needs sugar. Now. Dr. Thorne, blinded by his own rage and his need for validation, saw only defiance. "I'm not listening to a child. Get away from her, or I'll have you arrested." He bellowed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He bent down, a theatrical, performative movement, and began to administer a series of useless, panicked tests, his hands clumsy and uncoordinated. He was a doctor, and he was determined to prove it, even if it meant risking a life in the process. Leo, a boy who had been trained by a lifetime of being ignored, was impervious to their threats. He had a job to do. He had a system to fix. He looked at the candy bar display, his eyes scanning the colorful, chaotic mountain of chocolate and sugar. His mind, a quiet, methodical machine, had already made 1,000 calculations. The quickest one, the most effective one, the one that would provide the most immediate relief, was a simple chocolate bar. But he couldn't get it. He was being held captive, a silent, solitary figure in a world of frantic noise. The manager, a man who had now become the doctor's pathetic accomplice, was now standing over him, his arms crossed over his chest, a pathetic imitation of authority. "I told you to get away from her." He squealed, his voice a desperate, pathetic imitation of a command. The clock was ticking. The ambulance was still minutes away. Leo knew with a sudden, chilling clarity that this was not a game. This was not a test. This was a human life, and he was the only one who could save it. He had to act. He had to defy the doctor. He had to defy the manager. He had to defy a world that had spent its entire life ignoring him. He was alone, a single solitary figure in a storm of human chaos, and he was about to do the unthinkable. He was about to do what the world had been telling him his entire life he was not capable of doing. He was about to be a hero. The air in the checkout aisle, once thick with tension, now hung still heavy with a silent, breathless anticipation. The crowd, a collective jury just moments before, was now a collective audience, their gaze fixed not on the doctor's furious bluster, but on the quiet, unassuming teenager in the faded hoodie. The clock was ticking. The ambulance was still minutes away, and Leo, a boy who had spent his life in the back row, was now standing on center stage with a human life hanging in the balance. Dr. Thorne, a man who saw a stage and not a crisis, was now a study in pure, unadulterated fury. His face, once a mask of condescending confidence, was now a contorted mess of rage and disbelief. His entire world, a system built on unquestioning authority and professional validation, was crumbling before his very eyes. A child had challenged him, and the world for a fleeting, terrifying moment was listening. "I am a doctor." He bellowed, his voice a low, dangerous growl, his hands clumsy and uncoordinated as he performed a series of useless theatrical tests. "This is a medical emergency. You are a child. You're going to get her killed." His words were a last desperate plea for his narrative, a final futile attempt to regain control of a world that had spiraled far beyond his grasp. Leo, however, was in a different place entirely. The world around him had ceased to exist. The shouting, the frantic gestures, the judgmental faces, it was all a blur, a distant, muffled roar. He was a system, and he was focused on a single solitary goal to fix the system that was failing at his feet. His mind, a quiet, methodical machine, was running 1,000 calculations per second. He was processing the data, the shallow, irregular breaths, the clammy skin, the subtle, almost imperceptible tremor that still ran through Eleanor's body. He had called out the diagnosis hypoglycemia, and now he had to prove it. He had to act. He had to be a hero, not by choice, but by necessity. He looked at the candy bar display, his eyes scanning the colorful, chaotic mountain of chocolate and sugar. His mind, a quiet, methodical machine, had already made 1,000 calculations. The quickest one, the most effective one, the one that would provide the most immediate relief, was a simple chocolate bar. But he couldn't get it. He was being held captive, a silent, solitary figure in a world of frantic noise. The manager, a man who had now become the doctor's pathetic accomplice, was now standing over him, his arms crossed over his chest, a pathetic imitation of authority. "I told you to get away from her." He squealed, his voice a desperate, pathetic imitation of a command. The clock was ticking. The ambulance was still minutes away. Leo knew with a sudden, chilling clarity that this was not a game. This was not a test. This was a human life, and he was the only one who could save it. He had to act. He had to defy the doctor. He had to defy the manager. He had to defy a world that had spent its entire life ignoring him. He was alone, a single solitary figure in a storm of human chaos, and he was about to do the unthinkable. He was about to do what the world had been telling him his entire life he was not capable of doing. He was about to be a hero. And then in a moment of pure, unadulterated chaos, he acted. He ignored the doctor's shouts, the manager's threats. He simply reached out, and with a quiet, efficient force grabbed the manager's arm, a silent, powerful gesture that was a testament to his desperation. The manager, a man who was not used to being touched, let alone by a teenager, let out a high-pitched shriek of surprise and stumbled back, his arms flailing wildly. The crowd, which had been silent just moments before, gasped. The doctor, a man who had been a study in pure, unadulterated fury, was now a study in pure, unadulterated shock. He had been given a stage, and now a quiet teenager in a faded hoodie was not just stealing his thunder. He was destroying the entire set. In that moment of chaos, of pure, unadulterated anarchy, Leo acted. He sprinted to the candy bar display, his movements a testament to his calm, methodical mind. He grabbed a chocolate bar, his fingers moving with a quiet, efficient force. He sprinted back to Eleanor, his gaze not on the doctor, but on her. He knelt down beside her, his movements a testament to his quiet purpose. He ignored Dr. Thorne's booming instructions and Mr. Davies's panicked threats. His hands, though young, were gentle and steady. He unwrapped the chocolate bar, his fingers moving with a quiet, efficient force. He broke off a small piece and with a quiet, efficient force placed it in her mouth. The crowd, which had been a chaotic mass of panic and onlookers, was now silent. They had seen the contrast between the two men, the doctor, a booming, arrogant man who was more interested in his own performance, and Leo, a quiet, unassuming boy who was speaking with the calm, methodical authority of a true professional. The mother, the same mother whose child's teddy bear he had found just an hour ago, was standing in the crowd, a look of profound, dawning recognition on her face. She saw not a troublemaker but a hero, a quiet, unassuming boy who was defying a world that had spent its entire life ignoring him. And then the sound of sirens, a loud, piercing shriek that was a beautiful, welcome symphony in the chaos. The ambulance, a symbol of hope and professional competence, had arrived. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, a path cleared for the paramedics. The millionaire's husband, Mr. Vance, a tall, imposing figure with a face of quiet power and immense influence, stepped out of the ambulance, his face a mask of profound, unadulterated worry. He looked at his wife, then at the doctor, then at the manager, his gaze a quiet, terrifyingly clear statement of fact. He saw it all. He saw the incompetence, the arrogance, the prejudice, and the quiet, unassuming heroism of a boy in a faded hoodie. He saw the truth, a quiet, devastating truth that was about to change everything. The store, once a scene of utter chaos, was now a place of profound, unsettling calm. The ambulance, its sirens now silent, stood outside like a sentinel, its flashing lights painting the parking lot in a surreal dance of red and white. Inside the crowd, which had been a frenzied, unhelpful mass of panic, was now a quiet, respectful audience. They watched in hushed reverence as the paramedics, guided by Mr. Vance, the man of quiet power and immense influence, gently lifted Eleanor onto a gurney. Mr. Vance, a tall, imposing figure, his face still a mask of profound, unadulterated worry, stood over his wife, his hand gently stroking her forehead. He was a man who, in the face of a crisis, had a quiet, terrifyingly clear focus. He was not a man who played games. He was a man who fixed problems. And in this moment, the biggest problem he had to fix was not his wife's health, but the system that had failed her. The Dr. Alan Thorne, a man who had seen his stage utterly destroyed, was now a study in pure, unadulterated humiliation. His face, once a mask of condescending confidence, was now a pathetic, contorted mess of rage and disbelief. His entire world, a system built on unquestioning authority and professional validation, was crumbling before his very eyes. He had been given a stage, and now a quiet teenager in a faded hoodie was not just stealing his thunder. He was destroying the entire set. He tried to speak to defend himself, to reclaim his narrative, but the words caught in his throat, a pathetic, strangled gurgle. He had been a hero, a doctor, a man of power and prestige. And now, in this moment, in this public humiliating silence, he was just a fool. The store manager, Mr. Davies, a man who had been the doctor's pathetic accomplice, was now a study in pure, unadulterated terror. He saw the cold, unwavering gaze of Mr. Vance, a look that was more terrifying than any verbal threat. He saw a lawsuit, a public relations nightmare, a career-ending disaster. He was a man who lived his life by the rules, by the book, and this was an event for which there was no rule. He had sided with the man in the expensive polo shirt, the man who looked like a hero, and he had dismissed the quiet, unassuming teenager in the faded hoodie. He had made a choice, a fatal career-ending choice, and now in this moment, he was a man who had to face the consequences. Mr. Vance, a man who saw through facades, turned his attention to Leo. He saw a boy who, in a world of frantic noise, had a quiet, terrifyingly clear focus. He saw a boy who, in a world of panicked, unhelpful onlookers, had the courage to act. He saw a boy who, in a world of arrogance and incompetence, had a quiet, methodical, and profoundly effective competence. He saw the truth, a quiet, devastating truth, that had saved his wife's life. He walked over to Leo, his movements a testament to his quiet power, and placed a hand on his shoulder. It was not a gesture of gratitude. It was a gesture of respect. "You have a rare gift," he said, his voice a low, quiet murmur that was more powerful than any shout. "You see what others miss. You act when others panic. You have a quiet courage that is more powerful than any loud boast. I want to help you cultivate that gift. I want to give you a full scholarship to the college of your choice. I want you to be a part of my foundation, to use your talent to help others." His words were not a request. They were a gift. A quiet, profound, life-altering gift. Leo, a boy who had spent his entire life in the back row, was now a man who had been offered a seat at the front. He looked at Mr. Vance, his gaze calm and unwavering. His mind a quiet, methodical machine processing the data. He was not a hero. He was just a boy who had done what he thought was right. He had fixed a system that was failing. He had a quiet, unassuming goodness, a kindness that was more powerful than any wealth or status. He was in this moment a boy who had found his purpose. The chaos, that grand, messy symphony of fear and panic, was now gone. The store, a place of errands and commerce, was now a place of quiet, respectful admiration. The doctor, a man who had seen his stage destroyed, was now a pathetic, contorted fool. The manager, a man who had seen his career end, was now a trembling, terrified man. And Leo, a quiet, unassuming teenager in a faded hoodie, was now a man who had found his place in the world. He had found a benefactor, a mentor, a man who saw in him not a troublemaker, but a hero, a quiet, unassuming boy who was about to defy a world that had spent its entire life ignoring him. 3 years had passed, a fleeting, almost imperceptible blip on the grand, messy tapestry of time. The supermarket, that mundane arena where a quiet boy had become a hero, was now a distant memory, a faded photograph in the back of Leo's mind. The checkout aisle, once a scene of chaos and confrontation, was now just a place of commerce, its linoleum floor a silent, unblinking witness to 1,000 new, unremarkable dramas. The world, for all its chaos and noise, had moved on. But for Leo, a boy who had been a ghost in the machine, it had changed not just in its outward appearance, but in its very essence. The quiet, predictable system he had so expertly observed was now his to shape, to mold, to change for the better. He was no longer a silent bystander. He was a participant, a force for good in a world that so desperately needed it. He was now Leo Vance, a name he had taken on not out of a sense of obligation, but out of a deep and profound sense of respect for the man who had seen him not as a boy, but as a hero. He was a successful pre-med student at a top university, a scholarship student who was not just brilliant but deeply compassionate. His new life was a vibrant tapestry of friends and mentors, a world that was a far cry from the quiet, isolated existence he had once known. His days were filled with purpose, with the quiet, methodical study of the human body, the intricate, complex system that had in a fleeting, terrifying moment become his life's work. He would spend hours in the library, his mind a quiet, methodical machine processing the data of 1,000 medical textbooks, his gaze a sharp, reflective presence in the fluorescent glare of the lecture hall. He was a student, a scholar, a quiet, unassuming force of nature, a boy who was not just learning to be a doctor, but learning to be a man. But his new life, for all its purpose and promise, was not just about him. It was about paying it forward, a concept that Mr. Vance had instilled in him, a quiet, powerful philosophy that had become the driving force behind his every action. In his free time, he would volunteer at a local community center, a vibrant, chaotic place that was, in its own way, a microcosm of the supermarket where his life had changed. He would teach first aid classes to underprivileged kids, a quiet, unassuming group of children who in their own way were just as invisible as he had once been. He would teach them not just the mechanics of CPR, but the importance of being observant of acting when others hesitate, and of finding the courage to be a hero when no one is looking. He would tell them the story of a teddy bear, a lost, forgotten toy that had been a silent witness to a boy's quiet act of kindness. He would tell them the story of a pregnant woman, a stranger whose life had been hanging in the balance, a silent ticking clock that had been a call to action. He would tell them the story of a quiet, unassuming teenager in a faded hoodie, a boy who had defied a world that had spent its entire life ignoring him. He would tell them that a hero was not a man in an expensive polo shirt. A hero was a boy in a faded hoodie. A hero was a girl in a worn-out t-shirt. A hero was anyone who had the courage to act when others were too afraid to move. The story ends with a shot of Leo in his small, bustling classroom. A young girl, a quiet, unassuming child with a mop of dark hair and a gaze that was both sharp and deeply reflective, was struggling with a bandage. She was trying to wrap it around a doll's arm, her tiny fingers fumbling with the fabric. Leo, with a gentle smile, walks over and helps her, his movements calm and focused. He sees the girl not as a student, but as a person, a potential hero, a quiet, unassuming force of nature who was just waiting for her own second spring. He knows that the legacy of a quiet moment in a supermarket will live on, a second spring blooming in the heart of a new generation.